Hello, nature journalers. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about symbolic color. Now, there's so many different ways to use color in a nature journal, as I'm sure you all know. And a common way that I think is our default go-to is local color. So whatever you're seeing and however you're perceiving the color of what you're observing, you put that right down. You might mix colors to make it a little more exacting. You might do some color samples to try and get a good sense of some range of colors, even if you're not going to depict them all in imagery. And that is a fabulous way to use color. However, there are more options, and symbolic color is especially helpful for a variety of reasons. So let's say you want to make a map. Using symbolic color in a map can be a fast way to outline or to highlight certain zones and then to put them all on a key so it's a little easier to read without having to label everything. On a complex map like this, where there's a lot of action going on, it's really nice not to have to label all of the different zones of this wetland and instead hand that off to color and a key. Even on a nature journal entry that's a little bit more, say, elaborate or charismatic, you can use symbolic color in maps to show the location of where this various observation is happening. This format uses 3 levels of zoom in to really identify the exact location where this fungus was growing. So symbolic color and local color and more conceptual color, like up here where it's using just the yellow and the black to highlight specific patterns, can all play well together in any nature journal entry. Another really good use for symbolic color is for paths and for directing the eye. So this is all black and white, or pencil and paper, but by just having the highlighted red, it shows you the path of the turkeys as they were wandering and gobbling and kind of scrambling through the area around this pond and wetland. And then some of the questions or the exclamation points come out here to highlight the observations in the moment. So symbolic color can be not representational, but instead a way of identifying certain layers of information that you might want to add to your nature journal. So let's get to it with a quick demo. And for that, let's imagine that you are observing a California poppy. That's something perhaps many of us have seen. And if you were to make a diagram of that poppy, it might look something like this. So starting in the middle, we're going to simplify the form of the poppy because this is a diagram, not a detailed rendering. So there's usually the 2 main petals. I'm going to leave the inside a little open so I can expand that later. And then the other 2 petals kind of come out on the sides. And then in the middle is all this yummy, juicy, pollen-y stuff. And from the top down, you'll probably notice that there's 4 really frilly bits. And then there's some other little bits that are popping up from the center of the poppy. So as a diagram to understand kind of what's happening with the top-down view of a poppy, this is totally sufficient. No more detail is necessary. In fact, if you add a lot more detail to a diagram, it can distract from the clarity and the structure that you're trying to understand. Now let's say we turn that poppy over on its side, so we're looking at it from a flat view. And if you're looking at that, you might see the petals kind of coming out to the side. Again, it's a diagram, so we can be pretty simple on this. They curve up. We're not going to draw the 2 petals that obscure the center because the center is something that we're trying to understand. And then you'll notice that these little round bits top down are actually kind of long, maybe look a little bit like a hand. And then there's these other kind of popping out bits that look a little like this. And a poppy lives on its round pedestal and then has kind of a large receptacle underneath it. to support the overall flower. So when I'm trying to understand a poppy's anatomy or structure, this would be a totally fine diagram. What's interesting with symbolic color is that we can use it to identify the parts on both of these images without having to label absolutely everything, which might make it a little bit complicated to read. So let's identify via symbolic color the petals, the stamen, and the stigma. Now, if you're looking at an actual poppy, the petals are going to be orange, and the stamen is going to be yellow, and the stigma is going to be kind of yellow too. It might be hard to distinguish these various different parts. But with symbolic color, we can easily distinguish those parts by making them very different colors. So let's break all convention, and instead of using orange for the petal, let's go ahead and color the petals blue so it's easy to identify where they are on these two different views of the poppy. Just fill that right in. And again, there's not a lot of subtlety in this color because it's a diagram. No subtlety needed here. We're trying to use the color specifically symbolically to show what pieces are where. And on this diagram, the petals are these two large flanges on the side. So our next is going to be the stamen. And let's make those a really different color. So let's make those a purple. So that they are visible. And the stamen are going to be these bits around here. Just a touch of color for those. And on here, going to be this part. And that leaves us our last part, which is the stigma. And the yellow in this palette's not super vivid, so I'm going to go with a pink. Maybe this vivid pink would be a little bit more distinguishable. There we go. And then for the stigma, just little dots in these four air center points. And then here, we can do the whole side view. So when using symbolic color, we don't have to worry about form unless it's meaningful for the diagram. And we can use various different colors to correlate a key with what's happening in the observation. It's not complicated, but it's a really handy trick to be able to use in your nature journaling. And one thing that I've also learned is that you can use the same kind of color key to learn and do some comparisons. So all this up here is pretty involved, like there's a lot of local color happening here from observation and some matched color on the sides. But what I'm really interested in right now is all of these different flower parts and components that have these symbolic areas that are color-coded. So each of these flowers, for each of these, the blue is going to be the stamen and the pink is going to be the stigma. And this kind of creamy part is petals. And looking across at various different plants and various different flowers can start to understand how they're structured and how they're similar and how they're different based on this very consistent symbolic color coding. So yes, there's some observational color at the top, but really starting to understand a wide variety of different plants or animals, however you want to use your symbolic color coding, is really useful if you're looking across a wide variety of specimen. So that is a little bit about symbolic color. And as a recap, you can use symbolic color for diagrams, for maps, for paths, for anything where the actual observational color might be distracting or is not the purpose of what you're exploring, observing, and trying to understand. So there you have it, symbolic color for your nature journal. Happy nature journaling.